Marty McFly is a rebellious teenager who lives in a broken home. He wants to be a rock star with the girl of his dreams and a better future than he currently has. His best friend is an eccentric scientist named Doc Brown who has discovered the key to time travel, decking out a DeLorean car to be able to travel through time. After Doc is killed, Marty is forced to go back in time to get the help of Doc's younger version in order to try to find a way to get back home. And over the course of the next 2 movies, he will travel into the future, into the past once again, and even further in the past to save Doc. Back to the Future is a trilogy of comedy science fiction films that center around what it means to travel through time, the consequences therein, and the choices that inevitably will change and shift the direction of the flow of time. And throughout the trilogy of Back to the Future, we see through the experience of Marty McFly, as well as the decisions of other characters, in order to ask the question, how do you rewrite stories? In order to understand how to rewrite a story, we need the base foundation to parallel everything. 1985 is the prime version of what we experience. This is our baseline for where we are, the thing that tethers them all together. Although each movie has a separate setting, 1955 in the first, 2015 in the second, and 1885 in the third. Each of these being similar but vastly different from one another, with each of them having separate issues that parallel one another. When we see Marty go back in time the very first time, he is a fish out of water. He doesn't quite understand science, he doesn't quite understand what he's doing, and because of that, he needs younger Doc's help. With that help, it comes at a cost. Marty has to acclimate to whatever surrounding he is with the help of Doc, while Doc has to basically untether this wire of history that Marty being there is changing. These are key examples of how exactly we see a parallel for each and every place he goes. Despite the fish out of water situation, as well as the issues with the DeLorean, the main key issues that keep reoccurring throughout the timeline is essentially boiled down to the McFlys versus Tannins. This parallel of how much the Tannins have ruined the McFlys has just been a never-ending thorn in the sides of the timelines of the McFlys. You have young Biff from 1955, old Biff from 2015, and Mad Dog Tannen from 1885. Each of them more ruthless than the last, constantly hounding and going after either George or Marty, not quite understanding, like a dog on a leash just barking at things they don't understand and just hating change and hating things different that is beyond their control. These parallels constantly have to face Marty over and over again. In Back to the Future 2, Marty not only has to face the younger version of Biff, but has to face an alternative younger version of Biff, who is also trying to outrun his other self, and at the same time also having to face the older version of Biff without directly facing him, preventing him from wreaking havoc on his own timeline, resulting in horrors that are sure to come along the way. These problems are not secluded to just the Tannins, however. There's multiple issues that are in not only Marty's future, but the McFly past as well as the McFly present. The problems therein become like a hydra, cutting off one head with the sprouting of 2 heads. Marty never fully being able to handle the problems on their own, but more just trying to get an alternative outlook on the situation. But each and every action that Marty takes does eventually have ramifications. In Back to the Future Part 2, we see the darkest version of his timeline. Old Biff, having gone back in time with the sports almanac of every result of every sporting bet all the way up to 2002, gave it to his younger version to make him the richest man on the planet. Biff getting every single thing he wanted, being the most powerful man on the planet, and him having full control of the police, having his mom on a leash as some sort of thing to ogle at, and being subjugated to him, and finally killing his father. These are the ramifications of what happens when you tamper with time travel. The butterfly effects have now interfered into the prime timeline, making this the prime timeline. As Doc crudely explains that if he were to go back in time to this timeline, it would be an alternate version of the timeline and instead needs to go further back to when it first happened, creating a new course of time, as they are now in that new course of time. Everything has now changed, and for better or for worse, Marty has to do everything in his power to change that course. In Back to the Future 3, having changed the course of corrections for the evil Dark Line, the consequences also result in Doc ending up in the past. We don't necessarily know exactly what happened to Doc throughout his timeline. We do know, however, he ends up passing away by consequences of being shot. Now, Marty on a rescue mission to prevent the past Doc from being killed. Despite the fact that even if he did go back in time, it wouldn't really change anything in the course of corrections. His personal feelings have now interfered with the timeline so much that he doesn't quite know what's going to happen. And subsequently, in Part 3, Doc comes to that realization as well, having chosen his own happiness. Going back to Part 2 for a second, seeing Marty's girlfriend and then future wife have to become a housewife and choose what she wants to do with herself. While hiding out, Jennifer is in the home of future Marty and sees that he has been fired to the same issues his father faced, being bullied and pressured into doing things that he doesn't want, and him being injured because of a car accident playing chicken. These decisions may or may not change the course of correction with everything later. They're all just choices. The alternative is now the norm, with each decision making a web of different timelines, leading us to our conclusion. After everything is said and done, the decisions of Marty, the time traveling, the different explorations, seeing the positive and negative outcomes of his actions, his father being a well-respected science fiction writer, Biff being emasculated, Jennifer being happy to be with her man, but also her own person and trying to figure out who she is. Marty tries to see the betterment of the situation, getting in the truck and getting challenged into a street race. And in the middle of the attempted street race, Marty makes a decision to not proceed further. And that decision leads to him not suffering a car accident. The same car accident that Jennifer saw in Part 2 in the future timeline. This is a key focal point of the story. The actions, feelings, and experience that Marty went through, having met his previous versions, previous Docs, even met his ancestors, have now changed him for the better. And as the film's trilogy concludes, with Doc, Clara, and their two children, Jules and Vern, now with a new way of traveling through time, and as he goes off into the sunset, the lessons and experiences that Marty has learned, he can now make and plot a better course for his future. So, how do you rewrite stories? Stories at the center of everything are what we are. We are made up of stories that we pass along to others, hopefully in the remembrance of what we are. But those stories change over time, because we change over time. Each experience that Marty went through, he then learned something different. How to not take things seriously, how to not take things personally, how to be better than his previous versions. And with each new experience, be it physical or emotional, he then learned the consequences, the problems, and the alternative course of action that led to the decision of his own timeline. But ultimately, rewriting a story first starts with trying to figure out what exactly your story really is about.
Your future hasn't been written yet. No one's has. Your future is whatever you make it. So make it a good one. Both of you.
But in the end, these aren't answers. They're hypotheticals.
Tell me what you want.
A girl.
You summoned me for love.
Yes.
You would fit away my great power over such human trivialities.
You have to do what I say.
Look at you pretending to be brave